Can hear? Okay. Good afternoon, Excellencies, delegates and colleagues and friends. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the session, Clean Cooking, Delivering a Just Transition and Climate Wins, on behalf of Climate Change Secretariat. In fact, although we focus on clean cooking, it also many aspects of energy access is also included in the topic. In fact, clean cooking and off-grid electricity is a blind spot sort of in the climate action. Although 2.5 billion people today lack access to clean cooking, and also nearly a billion lack access to off-grid electricity, and then consequently there are quite a bit of emissions on that account. Nearly 2% of the global emissions is on account of lack of access to clean cooking. Yet the progress has been quite slow, and recent IEA analysis in World Energy Outlook 2022 shows that even by 2030 there will be 2 billion without access to clean cooking from the current 2.5 billion. So the business as usual approach is not going to work. In fact, World Bank has done some study that all you need is something like 30 to 40 billion per annum, which is less than 10% of what today goes for fossil fuel subsidies. That's the kind of resources required, but it's not happening. So there is much work to do. Good news is a number of NDCs, more than 60 of them, have included climate action which addresses to some extent energy access and clean cooking. But much work is required to be done before those goals are realized, because some of them are conditional upon country getting carbon market access or climate finance. And also the recent geopolitical situation means that 100 million people who had access to clean cooking, they don't have anymore that access because of the price of the energy. And similar number also applies for off-grid electricity, which is more than 175 million people lack that access. So we need to work in much more coherent manner with more sustainable solutions. So we have a great panel here today to discuss all those aspects and then find way forward, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. And with this, I will hand over to Forrest Robinett from Clean Cooking Alliance to introduce the panel and take us through the next hour to discuss this very important issue for climate action. Over to you, Forrest.
Thank you so much, Gaj, for the welcome on behalf of UNFCCC, and also I think for doing some extremely helpful stage setting there as we think about the topic of today's session and also about the challenge that stands before us in terms of both energy access and clean cooking. So I definitely won't delay any further in introducing the speaker who will deliver our introductory remarks. I have the pleasure of introducing Her Excellency Samira Bawumia, the Second Lady of Ghana, who is herself a tireless advocate of clean cooking and who's going to be contributing introductory remarks for today's panel. Your Excellency, please come join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Forrest, and hello, everybody. It's an honor to be here today and to provide introductory remarks. I'm sure our panel will do a wonderful job in addressing the issues. But the Clean Cooking Alliance has been instrumental in raising awareness of the relevance of access to clean energy, particularly clean cooking solutions and renewable energy technologies and solutions, and its impacts on sustainable development and the well-being of women and children. And I'm pleased to share with you some of the perspectives on how just energy transition with clean cooking solutions at the forefront can be. Energy continues to remain central to our daily lives, and it's the lifeblood that enables us to function and prosper. However, the energy industry finds itself at a crossroads. The world needs more energy. It needs cleaner energy. It needs reliable energy supply. And we need to find affordable and adaptable solutions. But this needs to be done in an ever more efficient and sustainable way, taking on board the challenges posed by climate change to our future. So, as we consider the challenges and opportunities for energy transition, we are really trying to push a sustainable path to uninterrupted energy access at an affordable price and in a manner which does not compromise energy for future generations. In other words, in a sustainable way. So this means that the energy transition must be just, and it must deliver sustainable energy for us all, leaving no one behind. So this also requires a constant reevaluation of what a just energy transition means, and to ensure we stay on the right path towards the goal. Clean cooking is an integral part of the conversation. Clean cooking is one of the most overlooked climate solutions, and it's one of the most underfunded and furthest behind indicators on the Sustainable Development Goals. Today, nearly 1 in 3 persons across the world still do not have access to clean cooking technology. And according to the Alliance, every year, cooking with solid fuels produces as much climate-harming emissions as the airline industry. Globally, domestic cooking emissions contribute about 1.9% to 2.3% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and up to 25% of the annual black carbon emission. My dear friends, Africa continues to account for the smallest share of global greenhouse emissions, yet remains the most vulnerable to climate change impacts. Research from International Institute of Applied System Analysis and Climate Analytics highlights that we remain far off track in achieving universal access by 2030. Without an increased effort, 2.1 billion people globally will still lack access to clean cooking in 2030. Reducing cooking emissions is critical to limiting the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Reaching net zero emissions by 2050 is a critical goal also, and this hinges on an unprecedented clean technology push by 2030. We all need to work together, step by step, to find issues of commonality and appreciate what is at stake. We need to transition to a more inclusive world in which every person has access to energy, a world where no one is left behind. A just energy transition is not a choice. It is a necessity and a global imperative. It is not just about switching from fossils to renewables. The energy transition challenge is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It involves a significant structural change from supply to consumption, and clean cooking is the ideal just energy solution. A report by the Climate Impact Partners succinctly put it: clean cooking is a nature-based solution, a technology-based solution, a community-based solution, and an opportunity to improve climate justice, end quote. The UN Climate Action Summit in 2019 identified nature-based solutions, NBS, as a fundamental component of addressing climate change and protecting biodiversity. There is still a lot of work to be done. 2030 is around the corner, and the clock is ticking. Transitioning to clean cooking is the foundation for safeguarding nature-based solutions. The sooner we do this, the quicker we can deliver a just transition and climate wins. Let us therefore strengthen synergies to effectively address the issues of climate. Until we advance global access to clean cooking, all of our climate mitigation measures are at risk. A concerted political will is essential for the clean cooking sector. The political initiative must be rooted in countries' ongoing energy transitions. We also need to prepare the youth for the job opportunities that the energy transition presents. According to IRENA, investing in energy transition technology creates up to 3 times as many jobs as fossil fuels for every $1 million spent. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by reiterating the fact that by changing the way families cook their food every day, we can help reduce direct emissions, avoid emissions from forest degradation, enable carbon renewal, protect biodiversity, improve air quality, support sustainable and economic growth, and improve food security. If we are committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions, we must also commit to clean cooking. We save ourselves when we save the planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. And to say the least, both Gaj and Her Excellency have given me an extremely easy job in terms of framing this panel today, as I really only need to provide a few more additional comments to talk about why we're here and what we hope you'll take away from this session. So, of course, we're here on Energy Day. And as Energy Day at COP, we have a few aspects of that mandate that we're trying to figure out in terms of our energy systems going forward. First, how can we ensure that our energy systems meet the mitigation goals that we have to address the climate crisis? Therefore, how do we rapidly scale down emissions to avert catastrophic climate change? We also have to ask about adaptation. How do we make sure that our energy systems are resilient to the effects of climate change that have already happened and that will continue to happen? And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, in a way that I think Her Excellency touched on very poignantly, how do we ensure a just transition for all in terms of the changes to our energy system, the ways in which it's not working for people now, and the ways in which we want it to work better in the future. So, quite simply, when we're talking about energy and our goals for energy in SDG 7, which is affordable, accessible energy access for all, we cannot talk about that goal without talking about clean cooking. About 700 to 800 million people lack access to electricity. Meanwhile, 2.4 billion lack access to clean cooking. And with that lack of access comes negative health impacts, comes negative climate impacts, negative impacts on gender, on women and girls, and also on livelihoods. And that's what we're going to be diving into today in our panel. And I'm so thrilled to be joined by 4 excellent panelists today who I now have the pleasure of introducing. So first up, we have Koen Peters, who is the Executive Director of GOGLA. We also have Rob Bayless, who is the Senior Scientist at the Stockholm Environment Institute, or SEI. We have Nora Magaro, who is on the Advisory Council of the Access Working Group, the Energy Access Working Group, of the Council of Engineers for Energy Transition. And finally, we have Donnie Alexander, who is the Chief Science and Learning Officer of the Clean Cooking Alliance. And I think we have a tremendous group here today to walk us through some of the topics, the opportunities and the challenges related to clean cooking that we're here to talk about today. So I'd like to start with you, Rob, as both Gaj and Her Excellency talked us through how clean cooking is such an overlooked climate solution, and yet at the same time is the perfect example of what I think is charismatic carbon, or something that can ensure a just transition when we deliver on clean cooking. Rob, you've done a tremendous amount of work on the climate impacts of transitioning from polluting stoves and fuels to cleaner options. I wanted to ask, would you just give us a lay of the land in terms of what kind of impacts do we see, positive impacts on the climate, when households and individuals transition away from polluting fuels to cleaner options?
Sure. Thanks, Forrest. Thanks for the introduction, really. Okay, so I'd like to explain this first by explaining what are the climate impacts from the current pathway, from what we currently see in low and middle income countries. So when people are reliant on fuel wood or charcoal, there are basically 2 ways that impacts the climate. And in order to understand what the benefits are of transitions, it's helpful to understand what those impacts are from current practices. So the first way has to do when people are harvesting wood or producing charcoal. If they harvest wood at a rate that the landscape can't regenerate, or is higher rates than the landscape can regenerate, then we see a net loss of trees on the landscape over time. The carbon in the trees ends up in the atmosphere as CO2. So every tree that's harvested, a small fraction of that carbon ends up remaining in the atmosphere. So that's one. So adding CO2. The other when we burn wood in an open fire in an inefficient device, or we make charcoal and then we burn that charcoal, it's just impossible to completely burn that. And you get a lot of what are called products of incomplete combustion, many of which are climate forcers. So they contribute to greenhouse gas, they contribute to global warming, more so than CO2, in fact. In addition, many of those pollutants are also health damaging pollutants. So there's overlap between the pollution that affects the climate and pollution that harms human health. Okay, so when we affect a transition to a cleaner option, we're basically affecting both of those pathways, probably in different ways. It depends on the specific option. It also depends on what was happening on the ground at baseline. Okay, so there's two pathways there, right? If we look at what the clean transitions are going on, largely the transitions that are occurring are adoption of cooking gas, or LPG, and to a lesser extent, cooking with electricity. LPG, of course, is a fossil fuel, all right? So that raises some concerns. And if you look at who has gained access to clean cooking over the past 10 years, roughly 600 million, according to WHO, 600 million people, and nearly 3/4 of that is LPG. So we're on this trajectory already, right? A smaller number, but also considerable, are adopting electricity, and much of the electricity in the world is derived from fossil fuels. So there's also an issue there. So some of the research I've done tries to quantify, what are the implications? Is this a climate loss with people switching from wood fuels, which we know affect the climate in some ways, to a fossil fuel, or to electricity derived from fossil fuels? So what we've done is we looked at the numbers, far too many details to go into, but essentially we think that it's not a climate loss. So both by reducing the offtake of unsustainable trees and contributing to CO2, when we take that away and replace it with a fossil fuel, and we take away the products of incomplete combustion and replace it with a fossil fuel that burns very cleanly, it's actually a climate win. Okay, and I can go into the details and the numbers and the weeds if you want, but let me just leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much, Rob, and especially for teasing out that difference between the non-renewability of wood fuel and also the incomplete combustion that comes from the ways in which households might be cooking their food. I do want to dive just a little bit deeper in terms of that component to forests. As you know, we've seen tremendous momentum and energy around nature in terms of the climate fight and exploring nature-based solutions in order to address some of the worst ravages of climate change. So, Rob, I want to ask if you would dive a little bit deeper in terms of the work that you've done on the connection between lack of clean cooking access and forest degradation, and also what are some of the benefits associated with forest ecosystems that we lose when communities around those natural assets don't have access to clean cooking?
Sure. So first, I'm glad that you used the term degradation and not deforestation. I like to draw distinctions between those. And oftentimes, reliance on fuel wood and charcoal gets blamed for a little bit too much of the deforestation that we see in the world. Much of the deforestation we see is completely disconnected from wood fuel demand. But there is degradation, and that's certain. We're removing wood, like I said, faster than the landscape can regenerate. So this is a natural nature-based solution, a little bit redundant, because if we can reduce that demand, either through more efficient devices or by fuel switching entirely, then we're easing that pressure. We're allowing the landscape to regenerate a little bit faster than it would otherwise. Okay? So that's basically where the benefits lie. But the benefits differ depending on where you are, because the landscape regenerates in different ways. And it's also subject to different kinds of pressures depending on where you are. So whether large-scale agriculture, small-scale agriculture, infrastructure development. So it behooves us to try and understand what is the local situation in any given place where we're having an intervention, to understand what the potential benefits might be. So we want to have a spatial understanding, basically, of this. And that's what some of my work has contributed to.
Thank you, Rob. Now I want to zoom out a little bit to look at some of the other co-benefits of clean cooking. As I keep talking about how clean cooking is such a critical aspect of a just transition, in addition to being a climate solution. So Donnie, I want to turn to you, as Rob, I think, has given us a really thorough understanding of the climate benefits of clean cooking action. Donnie, would you walk us through some of the other benefits of clean cooking, such as those for health, those for gender, and those for livelihoods?
Yeah, thank you, Forrest. And Rob described the climate and forest benefits so well, but it does not stop there. When we look at the benefits to health, we see that women and children who transition to clean cooking have lower exposures to that air pollution in their home and around their home and have the corresponding health benefits. So, for example, I did my postdoc research in Nigeria, and we looked at an ethanol transition. So women and children were cooking with kerosene and charcoal as their baseline fuels. We did a randomized study, and half of the women in the trial received an ethanol cook stove and the fuel, the associated fuel. So ethanol burns very cleanly, not the other way around. And what we saw, and then we did this with pregnant women, right? Women who came into the prenatal clinics who were pregnant. We followed these women over the course of their pregnancy to understand their exposures. And then the women had the babies, and we tested the health of the mothers along the way. What did we find? We found that those women who transitioned to ethanol stoves in this study had babies that were born heavier. 90 grams heavier. That is significant in terms of having a baby in sub-Saharan Africa. The other thing we saw, they were born a week later. So they had a week longer to stay in the mom's baby or the mom's belly so that they could come to term. The other thing that we noticed was that mothers, despite living in a quite polluted city. So this was in the city of Ibadan. So it is a metropolis area where there is a lot of ambient air pollution. Despite being in the city, we were able to reduce their air pollution so that the mothers also had health benefits. So we saw a decrease in hypertension in the intervention group and also reduced blood pressure of the mothers. So we see that if we, in some cases, that there are health benefits. And those health benefits, especially when you look at babies and pre-birth, is really important. I want to provide one more health example because it's important. There's another study in Ghana, and this study has been an ongoing study for about the past 10 years. And they are finding now with children that are 4 years old that their development is further along than the babies who were born to mothers who used polluting stoves. So this is an LPG, randomized control. So pre-intervention, before birth. So they transitioned back after this study. But even that period while the mom was pregnant, now think about this. If you are able to stay in a place where you can have clean fuels while you're pregnant, you're protecting the future of your babies and your children. And that is, we need to understand that. Even though they went back, those babies were protected. So I think it's really, there are some really important things when we're thinking about the future of sub-Saharan Africa, if we're thinking about the future of South Asia and other places with high rates of solid biomass use, we need to transition these people to stacking with clean fuels and reduce that exposure so that we can have societies that are living their healthiest life. The other thing that I want to talk about really quickly is gender, because that's important. Gender is so important in this because who is collecting the fuel? We all know this. We all know it is the women and the children. It is the women and the children. And I told this story a couple days ago, but when I was in Bolivia doing some research, the children on like whatever day of the week it was, they would go out and skip school that day to collect fuel. When they ran out of fuel, they just did not go. Now think about the missed days of education because they had to go out and collect that fuel. And think about the woman who sits over that fire, who has no time to do anything else. And what we've seen in some recent studies, when you really transition to some of the cleaner fuels, you're saving, in one company, they're saving over an hour and a half a day. Now think about, if I had an hour and a half a day to my time, like it would be, I mean, that is, you have so many limitless opportunities there, but we don't value that as a society. We don't value that time saved for the women and children like we should. So I think the co-benefits of clean cooking are really clear and really important.
Thank you, Donnie. And I think now we've heard from our experts on the panel who have done a really nice job of outlining what the co-benefits of clean cooking are and the magnitude of those benefits. And now I want to shift to hear about some organizations and some leaders in those organizations who are doing really exciting work in the energy access space, working to achieve SDG 7 and make sure that no one is left behind. So Koen, I first want to go to you. And I first just want to ask if you would just tell us a little bit about Gogla's mission and your work, and then if it's okay, I'll ask you a follow-up question after that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Forrest. And I'm really delighted to be here. It doesn't happen all that often that we have those interchanges between off-grid solar and the clean cooking sector. But it's really important, I think, that we get out of our bubble and make the connections. So I represent around 200 organizations. Around 150 of them are commercially trading off-grid solar products. And off-grid solar goes from a solar lantern towards solar home systems where there's a small solar panel laying on the roof of a row house, a battery on the wall, and a few lanterns hanging from the ceiling. Can power the lights and phone charging. Can power a radio, a television. If it's a larger system, can do a fridge. And it goes on towards a rooftop solar for power backup solution in weak grid situations, and to a standalone solar for water pumping and for refrigeration. Our market has had more traction than the clean cooking sector over the last decade. The market, the technology exists for about 15 years in its current form, arriving with the arrival of white LED lighting, which meant that we could have very small and lower cost systems. And to date, where we are right now is around 490 million people are currently benefiting from some form of an off-grid solar energy product. These people benefit from an improved quality of life, a longer day, kids that can study not under a kerosene lantern but with electrical light, portable light, can be taken outside and improve safety when people have to go outside during the night. It gives access to communication, so people don't have to go to downtown to have their phone charged, but can do it at home. To information, if they can get access to the radio or television. And it creates a lot of job income generating opportunities and new jobs. People that use lights to keep the shops open for longer, to charge phones of colleagues, have a restaurant with music, all the way to people that have hair clippers, sewing machines, use it for agro processing. There's a wide range of themes where we generate impact. And one of the themes where we definitely connect with the clean cooking sector is in the climate impact. Although they're slightly different, I think, in balance. The baseline technology that people would use before they have an off-grid solar product tends to be still, in very many cases, a kerosene lantern, or in larger, typically SME solutions, a diesel generator. And I don't know whether you've ever been in the environment of a diesel, or a few set of diesel generators that have been poorly maintained. They're really dirty and disgusting. But also the kerosene lanterns, quietly with their open wicks, produce a lot of soot and black carbon, and that has an oversized impact on global warming, particularly on the short term. This is not to say at all that people that use kerosene lanterns are guilty of climate change. Their overall contribution is still super small, but relative to what they get out of it, it's an oversized impact, and it's a low-hanging fruit, and it's a co-benefit from eradicating the kerosene lanterns that we should eradicate for so many other reasons anyway. So that's an element where we connect on climate mitigation impacts. I think we also connect with climate adaptation and resilience impacts. Off-grid solar products help people to be better informed and to be warned, be able to prepare themselves for natural disasters, but also to create job generation or income generation opportunities so that people are more resilient and less dependent on single sources of income. Maybe I should pause there and give the word back to you. But this is some of the areas where we definitely feel very strongly connected with clean cooking.
Kuhn, thank you. You made my follow-up question irrelevant because I was going to ask about the connections between your work and clean cooking, which I think you did a really nice job of elucidating for us. One thing you did mention in your answer that is something that I'd love to get into is you mentioned that the off-grid solar sector has had tremendous success. It's definitely should be a source of envy for other sectors. I wanted to ask, what are some of the factors that you think contributed to that success?
We've had tremendous success if we look back. If we look forward of the change, the size of the challenge still ahead of us, we definitely don't see it as tremendous success, but a good start. Indeed, we think we can bring a message of hope and inspiration here. With that 490 million people, we think we've done already made a good dent in where we need to go. But we've come out with our bold target ourselves in our high-level dialogue energy compact and relaunched here as our climate commitment from the industry to reach 1 billion lives by 2030. That's going to be a bold target. Just 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks now, we had our own biannual industry gathering where we took stock of where the industry is at. And what I found particularly encouraging to see is the successful models that we've seen of governments, multilateral development banks, donors, and industry working together to reach customers in a sustainable way. The industry has been quite resilient during COVID, but still took a hit. But in that period, quietly, we've seen a number of models develop. Rwanda and Nigeria are two examples of countries that have really sussed it out in the last few years, and where we see a fast acceleration of sales and customers being reached. And that gives me the hope that we can still see the doubling, the tripling, the quadrupling of energy access growth that we still need to see to really reach universal energy access by 2030. Not going to be easy, but possible. Zooming in on your question, what's the difference with clean cooking? Honestly, I don't find it easy to answer that because the conceptually it's not very different. It's companies selling assets to households so they can keep control over their own way of how to improve their lives, and with those assets they gain time, they save money, and it's improving their lives. I think if I think about it, but I think there's many arguments that can be had about it. The benefits that off-grid solar has for households are aiming more towards more income generation and opening more opportunities, whereas the benefits from clean cooking are more about reducing concerns and chores and lost time. It's a slightly different balance, perhaps also in what it costs versus what you can get out of it. But other than that, I think conceptually it's the same approach. It's businesses reaching out to households to deliver a public good. And I would hope that we can definitely, going forward, replicate some of those success stories also for clean cooking at larger scale.
Thank you so much, Kuhn. And now I want to shift over to Nora, who, as I mentioned in the introduction, works with the Energy Access Working Group for the Council of Engineers for Energy Transition. And Nora, I wanted to ask if you would please just tell us, to start off, a little bit about the mission of the Council of Engineers, and then, as promised, I'll probably share a follow-up question after that.
No problem. Thanks so much. So even before I share so much about the CET, that is the Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition, I just want to tell you, Donnie, how much I really, really relate with your findings, being an African mom, having given birth to a baby in Kenya, and knowing and living in the fear that my child is going to be underweight and I have to pay the medical expenses, and what the implication could do that to her future. And I've seen, my daughter is 5 right now, but I've seen the difference in children who are born in extenuating conditions that affected their health care and didn't really achieve their milestone by the time they're 5 or they're 10 years old. So I totally relate with the effects of the non-clean cooking technologies within the African household and what that means for the future. So going further into that, she has those facts, and there's so many findings around the world. But sadly enough, if you look at the statistic between 2010 and 2020, only 1% increment in adoption of clean cooking technologies. 1%. And right now we're in 2022. I'm pretty sure it's less than 1% increment in adoption of clean cooking technologies globally. So just holding on to that fact, the Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition is an independent advisory council that comprises of engineers and energy systems experts. And our role is to ensure that we build the UN Secretary General's coalition to achieving net zero. And we can't really, we need to achieve this net zero by 2050. So that means these CO2 emissions of 3% within the clean cooking globally still needs to be accounted for that. So for us as an organization, our mandate is ensure that we contribute to this coalition and ensure that each and every single technologies that are being produced and distributed globally, including the clean cooking technologies, are sustainable, resilient, and also reliable for each and every single person. But also they should be just. Like if you look at the clean cooking sector and how much women really do face the biggest brunt and the unfairness within that sector alone. So we have to ensure that our strategies are also just and the technologies being introduced in the market. But also these technologies that we are giving advisory recommendation to should contribute to economic development for each and every single person, as well as improve the livelihoods for each and every single person with the mission of leaving no one behind. So the CET give recommendations at a global perspective, but also country-specific recommendations on how these technologies can contribute to ensuring that we get to achieve net zero by 2050, and we do it justly. Now, if you look at the global south and the rest of the world, obviously there's been different progresses when it comes to adoption. That's why you find like the biggest brand for clean cooking is actually faced in the global south. So it's very, very important for us as an advisory body that we actually still give global recommendation, but then also look at the highest, what can I say, the hotspots that are widely affected by non-clean cooking technologies, that are widely affected by the most unjust ways of energy access, that are affecting various gender power structures, and also address them. Because if we need to move together as one people on earth towards a net zero economy by 2050, then each and every single person, irrespective of where they are or where the challenges are, must be addressed at that level.
Thank you so much, Nora. And I wanted to ask if you would share a little bit more about your specific portfolio within CET. Obviously, you come to this position with tremendous expertise in energy access, and it's really helpful to get that additional information about what is the mandate of your working group to decarbonize everything by 2050. If you would just tell me a little bit more about, what are the specific systems that you find yourself working on, giving recommendations on, and if you have any lessons or takeaways for, I think, other people in other sectors who are working to also decarbonize and reduce emissions.
All right. So I'm an engineer, and the CET is highly engineering based. Actually, it's a team of high-level engineers. I'm actually one of the youngest engineers in there, but it comprises of a team of experts. Now, for us to achieve to net zero by 2050, these efforts have to be multi-sectoral. So there's the part the economies play, there's the part that technology developers play, there's the part of that engineers play. So as engineers, we've looked at the sector and all the efforts that have been put towards adopting technologies, and we see there has been so many gaps and loopholes that are falling, that technologies are falling into them. So we get to evaluate all technologies as a whole and say, okay, fine, this is the progress that we've made in 2022, but then we have a goal to achieve by 2050. So the technologies that already exist, how do we accelerate the deployment? So we look at generally clean energy, whether it's the productive use of energy assets, are the appropriate technology. Eventually, when we use the technologies, do they contribute to further CO2 emissions? And how do we work around it to ensure that you actually don't contribute further? We also look at what are the upcoming technologies, what are the emerging technologies. Can we accelerate them further? What is the research needed to actually accelerate these technologies further? If you look at the clean cooking, there's been so much technologies that are coming up, and I'm giving Kenya as a study where, and also Rwanda, where we have electric cooking, we have clean cook stoves that use less fuel, biofuel. Also, we have the, what are they called? The bioethanol stoves that are coming up and really taking adoption. But then we also have to look at what are the other emerging technologies that are still under development. And is this development, it doesn't really cut across the board. What Kenya needs is very different from what Ghana needs, and what Uganda needs, and also very different from what is needed in Southeast Asia. So how do we accelerate them fast enough? By contributing to the research, contributing to the engineering, and also just contributing to giving, what can I say, case studies and experiences on how they have been adopted in various places, and what were the the learnings that actually promote this adoption. But then also we have to put in so much R&D. As engineers, our focus also is to build R&D, because we have to build for the future. So we do R&D and we contribute to this research to ensure that there is more innovation that is new, that is additional, that will just ensure that we all get to 2050 and to a net zero economy.
Thank you, Nora. And your point about the importance of different technologies for diverse contexts is so well taken, as we know that this is not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think Her Excellency made tremendous points about that in her introduction, is that a one-size-fits-all is not going to do justice to anyone and is not going to bring about the kind of transition that we want. So with that in mind, Rob, I would like to go back to you, as I think you're very well positioned to speak about this. In the research that you recently completed, you looked at quite a few different fuels in terms of transitioning to clean cooking. I wanted to ask, and I think you were very, very kind and very considerate in not wanting to get too wonky with the audience here, but I did want to ask if you would go into a little bit more detail about some of those transition pathways in terms of ethanol, in terms of LPG, in terms of gridded electricity. I think the audience might benefit hearing just a little bit more about what you found in those projections.
Sure. So I'll wonk out. Okay, so we look primarily at LPG and electricity for reasons that I explained earlier, because there is momentum there. These trajectories are already playing out. But there are some other upstarts, let's say, some other fuels that could definitely serve a purpose in terms of making a more diverse and resilient energy economy available for people in the Global South. Could be more appropriate in certain cases, in landlocked countries where it's difficult to get LPG in, where the grid is a little bit uncertain. So we looked at ethanol, and if you follow the clean cooking scene, say, in Kenya, then there's a company that has really done tremendous things with ethanol-based cooking. They've reached 500,000 households in under 3 years during COVID, and with a commercial-based model that's really something to envy and potentially emulate. Ethanol brings its own issues. If you're an environmentalist, an environmental scientist, then there are implications of ramping up ethanol use to a very large scale. So we can look at that, look at the land use change implications of producing ethanol. The emissions are quite low. Donnie mentioned earlier the study that she did in Nigeria. But from a life cycle perspective, it's still a win. It's just because wood fuels are so dirty, really. If you're pumping out black carbon, if you shut that off, it's a climate win, pretty much, from the get-go. We also looked at pellet fuels, which have gained a little bit of traction in some localities in Central and Eastern Africa. And again, pellets are, again, a little bit complicated. It's not a given that they'll be clean. You need to couple the fuel with the device. But there are some very clean-burning pellet stoves out there that are available and not quite affordable, but with the right kind of financing, you can make it work. And this is, Rwanda had an example that really gained some traction and couldn't quite pull off the full commercialization, but now there's some follow-ups to that. So it's space that's worth watching for sure. And as a scientist, I don't want to pick a technology and say, like, this is the one, this is the way to go. I want to keep it open and understand, like, all of these are worthy of support. They all bring benefits. They all bring non-economic benefits that are possibly worth subsidizing. Like this, it should all be explored. I don't want to shut down any one channel. And they're all climate wins compared to the baseline. Like, there's no doubt about that.
And Rob, because I know Kuhn was talking about black carbon in terms of pivoting away from the kerosene lamps that many households were using for lighting and just the unbelievable soot that comes from that. Rob, what is it that makes black carbon such a powerful climate forcer and such a win if we deal with it now?
We're going to go there. Okay. So for those of you who are not aware, black carbon is the soot. It's the stuff that you can see, the little blackness that you can see in combustion that's not quite clean. If you use a kerosene lamp, for example, it's the stuff, if you don't adjust it perfectly, it's the stuff that coats the inside of the globe of a kerosene lamp. So it's basically like you're putting out little pieces of blackness into the atmosphere, and it circulates. It stays in the atmosphere roughly 2 weeks, so that's why we call it a short-term forcer, a short-lived forcer. But during those 2 weeks, it can have a huge impact. It can also settle, depending on where it's emitted and where it circulates. It can settle on lighter colored things, and like snow, like glaciers, and then lead to additional climate impacts. So it's a fairly complicated topic. It's co-emitted with organic carbon, which makes things really complicated. I'm not even going to touch that. But it's it's a very potent warmer. Somewhere between 200 and 800, there's a lot of uncertainty, times the warming potential of CO2. One thing I did want to say, though, you asked about the difference, if I may, between one of the key differences, I think, is a very technical difference. There's no fuel supply chain when you're talking about off-grid solar. And that's a really tough nut to crack when you're introducing a new fuel for cooking. So whether it's something that we have a lot of experience like LPG, or even just delivering grid electricity, that's something you have to think about every damn day, right? To get the fuel into the person's house. Pellets, ethanol, all of that. And it's a problem that's not associated with a nice off-grid solar device. So that makes things much easier.
Thank you, Rob. And I hope everyone in the audience now can go forth and be black carbon experts, as soot or black carbon is an extremely powerful short-lived climate forcer, and household energy at 51% is the single largest controllable source of black carbon. So it's absolutely something we have to deal with. Kuhn, I'd like to come back to you as I know we're running short on time, and I could talk on this topic all day, but I would like to zoom out just a little bit, as I really appreciate when you were telling us about some of the reasons that the off-grid solar industry has had such tremendous success is these opportunities for income generation or economic activity. But I also wanted to ask, just more broadly, as you think about your organization's mission, how do you tie together all of these outcomes that we care about, those social, climate outcomes, and how do you use that to really sell your work? Just any thoughts that you have there would be welcome.
It's a very broad question, but yeah, that partnership between so many different stakeholders, public sector, private sector, investors, that is of course crucial, that we so crucial to our work, and it means that we all need to be humble and have a sharing mindset. We're on the same, working on the same goal. I want to talk a little bit about something else still connected to it with what I just heard from Rob here, and what a little bit perhaps also connect to your question, what is needed to going forward, and connecting that with the climate agenda. What I think we both see in the clean cooking sector and the off-grid solar sector is that we are both industries with a lot of externalities. Many industries have negative externalities and not being charged for us. Our industries have very positive externalities and don't benefit from it sufficiently. That is the climate mitigation, but particularly also the climate resilience and climate adaptation. If we can find ways to, together with the clean cooking sector or whoever, to monetize those benefits, then I think we're on a path to adjust some of the barriers towards scaling of that market. It shouldn't be so commercial as it is right now. Just, at the moment, too much of the efforts to sell these products is with the households and the businesses and the farmers, and more of it should be with the public sector.
Thank you, Kuhn. And now we do need to wrap up, so I will go to our panelists for a rapid fire round. And I want to ask them a question that was not shared with them in advance, so I hope they'll humor me for a moment. And the way I'll frame it is this, is what is something that scares you and what is something that excites you about the future of the energy access sector right now. So essentially, what is something that you're really worried about because it's such a pressing challenge, and what is something that really gives you a lot of hope for our energy access goals going forward? I'll start with Donnie, and we'll work our way down to Kuhn at the end.
I think my biggest fear is that coming out of COP and coming out of all of this, where we clearly see how big of an issue things like off-grid solar, clean cooking are, that the donor countries, that the investment will not come in to spur it to where it needs to go. But my excitement has been the last 6 or 9 months working with UNFCCC and other partners, including US EPA, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, Stockholm Environment Institute, with country governments who want support on including clean cooking in their NDCs. How do they do it? They ask for help with baselines, understanding how they get their baselines, how they develop programs, how they develop monitoring and verification systems. So the demand is clearly there. So there is demand for this issue from the country governments, and our job is to capacitate them so that they are able to meet this and bring in the financing that is needed to move us on this transition. Thank you.
So what really scares me is we are really churning out technologies within the clean energy sector so fast. So many technologies are out there, but I am scared there aren't enough circularity models to be able to take this back, so that we give them end of life or we repurpose them. Like, I still need to see more circular economy models also still catering for all these technologies being churned out. But what excites me is there are a bunch of 14-year-olds and 19-year-olds somewhere in their bedroom innovating, coding, and coming up with amazing innovation that we never know. We never really know what the next frontier of innovation is going to be. So I am hoping that they'll figure it out somehow.
Okay. So I think what scares me is how vulnerable our entire system was revealed to be in the face of just successive global crises. And if we do make a transition to cleaner cooking for all, we have to do it in a way that acknowledges that vulnerability, right? To global oil shocks, to semiconductor shocks, and so we're not setting ourselves up to fail. So we need diverse systems in place, and we need backups in place to ensure that if we do make that transition, the next shock that comes along doesn't set us back. What excites me, I'm going to go with what Donnie had said, just to second her, in the sense that there are so many governments that are now really embedding this in policy and making it something that is actionable.
I can do one better, Rob. If those shocks of the past scared you, I think I'm scared of 1.5 degrees or more. And to make it very self-centered, I'm scared of what that does to the customers of our industry. What excites me is the opportunities that we still have to do something about that, and what we can do if we all get working in the same direction, and the accelerations that we see in those few areas where we're trying. Too many areas we're still not trying as on the planet as humanity, but where we do, we can do amazing things.
Thank you so much. And I heard so many notes of hope from each of our panelists, whether it's the demand and the interest that we see from the stakeholders that really matter, like governments, whether it's the role that youth are going to play and the passion and the interest that they bring to this issue, or it's the fact that even though we barely have any time, there is still some time to do the right thing. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today for this panel. I hope it was useful as we tried to lay out to you the issue and the landscape of clean cooking, and also point to some solutions and some pathways forward as to how we might solve this really pressing issue. But I want to ask if you would please join me in thanking our panelists and Her Excellency for the opening remarks. It was just a tremendous conversation. Thank you so much.